Welcome to Technique Friday. This is the second session for colour blending. Now, this week's theme is the colour red. Now, as I talk to you a little bit on the colour wheel, each week I will have a look at this. So let's zoom in on this colour wheel. So I've got it marked from red to red. So as you go around, the one thing that you'll notice with the colour red is that it is least likely to blend with an awful lot of the rest of the colour wheel. Unlike yellow that blends with most things, red does not. It tends to blend only with its warm cousins in the red and yellow orange spectrum. So as we pop around, you'll notice that the colours look very complementary, that they're in synergy and harmony together, and they really start lightening up here. And then when we get to green, there we go, neutral, brown, a darker form of brown, neutral again. When you go to a blue-green, in that teal category, you start getting those different shades of purples that I explained to you last week. If you go more of a primary blue, you'll get a very dark purple like we explored last week. If you go to a blue-violet that has red in it, so now we're going, the violet has red in it, you're starting to see more of a grapey purple. And it's not this cold blue purple, but a grapey kind of purple. So if we go to violet, again, we're increasing the red content in this top colour. Then we're adding yet more red to it, and we're going more grape and heading towards a magenta colour. So you've got red violet, and then you've got like a red fuchsia magenta kind of a colour. And then we're back to red. There's an awful lot of that colour wheel that's neutral and doesn't work properly, or the colours are too muddy and they're not what you want. Now, you really need to seriously think about when you're doing reds. These are all the reds I have, and if I zoom out just a touch, you'll notice that they're all different types of paint. And there's one in there that's actually called brown matter. But when I just quickly swatch that for you, you'll understand that it's actually a red. Now I have a fluid acrylic in the Golden brand. I have Liquitex Basics. I also have Ruby in the Dina Wakley paint. I have Atelier Artists Acrylic Interactive. This is a primary red in the Liquitex Basics, and this is a Naphthol Crimson. So the two things that you'll find is one looks a bit pinker than the other. One's just slightly bluer than the other. One's a red, what you'd call a red, and one's not. When you have a look at them on paper, you'll understand the difference. And then we have a brown matter, which looks like that on the tube, but when it comes out of the tube, as you have an indication coming through here, that's much lighter. It is much more vibrant than that. So let's quickly just show you that not all reds are equal. And when you go to buy reds, there are some basic things that you should understand. So I'm not going to use a lot of this paint in this. I'm going to just put a drip. And this is the golden. So let's bring that down. So this is your golden fluid acrylic. And what it says, when you buy golden paints, they have these black bars through, and they have an actual paint swatch over the top. And that tells you how translucent that is. So let me just splotch all these paints next to each other in the order in which I'm doing them, so that you understand that not all reds are equal and not all the properties of paint are equal. And then we'll quickly talk about blending. And I'll show you a particular blending technique. So each week in these classes, I'm going to do a colour lesson on each colour, and then different ways that you can blend them with great success. and then a particular blending technique that I use. Right, so let's quickly get a pencil or a pen and write those in so that you know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to stuff. Okay, so we've got golden pyrrole red, we've got Liquitex Basics in primary red, we've got Dina Wakley in ruby, we've got Atelier Artist Acrylic in crimson, we've got Liquitex Basics in Naphthol crimson, and we have Jo Sonia, and we have brown matter. And the reason I'm including that is I'll show you a little bit later when we're colour blending and the ideal blends and some things that you may not know about blending reds. So let's swatch this. So this is your basic primary red from Liquitex Basics. And you clean your brush in between each one. This is Dina Wakley Ruby. Just got a rag. This is the Atelier Artists. It's a thicker body paint. Liquitex Basics, creamier, thinner paint. Naphthol Crimson. And the Jo Sonia Brown Matter. Now, not all reds are equal. If we have a quick look at those, you can see that not all reds are equal. I mean, this is supposed to be a primary red, but it looks pinker to me. And I think when you're having a look at your reds, you really have a look. For me, my personal favourite, I think, would probably have to be the Liquitex Basics Naphthol Crimson. If I'm going to have a look at the type of red that I consider a true red, in my personal taste, it would definitely be the Golden Pyrrole Red, Dina Wakley Ruby, and the Liquitex Basics Naphthol Crimson. But all of these reds have their place, and you would find it difficult to make this kind of red. It's a primary red, very, very difficult to make. So all of these reds, one of the reasons I have lots of reds is, and I don't even have as many as Gina, Aaron's, but the reasons I have these reds and I collect reds is they are primary colours, and so you can't make them from anything else. And so I choose to have different reds that are blended. And I have cheap poster reds as well, but I'm not using them here. I'm just showing you a basic range from expensive to mid-range to cheap in this brand, and the cheapest out of all of these would probably be the Liquitex Basics Naphthol Crimson and the Jo Sonia Brown Matter, and these Liquitex Basics. But the Golden and the Dina Wakley and the Atelier, they're all more expensive. Okay, so some things about reds. Now I'm going to pick one red here, and I'm going to pick the Liquitex Basics. So let's just go out a bit. And I'm using a big sheet today so that it's very easy for you to have a look at these tests. So I have a bunch of paints here in colour families. So what I'm going to do is let's just write it out. My tests today are going to be, I'm just going to do columns, yellows, because of course red blends with yellows. Then I'm going to do purples, because red blends with purples, and the redder the purple the more it blends, and magentas. I'm going to have a look at browns. Now this is one that you wouldn't necessarily think, because this is a secondary colour, and so is this. So it's a secondary colour and this is a primary. Then I'm going to have a look at flesh tones, because when you're doing faces, red with flesh is important. And these are all unbleached whites and beiges. And then finally, we're going to have a look at white. So you notice there I don't have blues, I don't have greens, because I know they all make browns. I explained it to you on the colour wheel. If I had to put a red with blue, it'll make a deep purple, but I'm already using purple, so I know we did some tests last week. But if I pop it with greens, it's going to make browns. So I'm going to throw some yellows in really quickly. Not that quickly. And some, you know, your yellows are not all equal. So I'm using some Liquitex Basics, some Joe Sonia. I'm using what's called a flesh tint, but it's actually quite yellow. It's like a buttery yellow. And I'm going to use a golden Hansa yellow. Let's move this so you can see the tests. Right, so ignore this yellow here. So I'm going to use the Naphtol Crimson, and we'll use that for the same colour all the way down, because for my mind, when you're going to test how a colour reacts, you need to use the same tests all the way round. So if you strictly wanted to see how all of these yellows, you would pick each one of these reds and then you would do a series of colour tests like that. So what I'm going to do now is just join them together to show you the sorts of colours that are made when you join each of those different yellows with the same red, which is a Naphtol Crimson red. Okay, so this is what each of these paints has created with the same red. And I might add that I've combined here a Liquitex Basics paint, a Liquitex Basics paint, and a fluid acrylic. Now they don't interact the same. So when you're combining different types of paint, they don't necessarily mix like for like. So here with the Basics to Basics, you've got a really good colour blending, and the same, it has a similar consistency, the Joe Sonia. You've made a real pink here with the flesh tone, which is a pastel. So there's a lot of white in that. So red and white make pink, and it's just a hint of the yellow, so it's going into a peachy pink. Okay, so you've got your pink, but because it's got the yellow flesh tint in it, it's a peachy pink because it's got the yellow and red make orange. Orange plus white equals peach. And down at the bottom we've got the red, not significantly changed by the fluid acrylic. So if I was to then work together with, just quickly, with the golden red, and quickly do a test with the golden red here, down the bottom, golden red, one drop with the golden yellow, one drop. Let's have a look and see what that does. You'll be surprised at the result. Or not surprised if you use golden paints. So these are more transparent paints, but the properties of the paint are more similar. So when you blend like to like, and that's a pyrrole red, it's actually not that dissimilar from the Naphthol crimson. It comes up with far more of an orange. The yellow has taken more effect than it has above because they're both fluid acrylics, and they both have roughly the same transparency. If you have a look at the bars here, they both have roughly the same transparency. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward the tests for the rest of the paints so that you can see me performing them. They're all going to be done with this Naphthol crimson colour, and I'm going to do them the same way that I've just shown you, and then I'm going to go through and explain them all. Okay, so really quick explanation about what is happening here. So this is with the purples. So we used a purple madder. Now a purple madder is already a red purple, and it's got some brown in it. It's one of those earthy colours, and we used magentas as well, so I definitely popped some magentas in there. I used a brilliant violet, which is a blue violet, and that's this colour here. I also used a brilliant magenta, which is this colour here. So the brilliant magenta is just kind of made it a little bit pinkier. And then at the end I used a deep violet in the Liquitex Basics. So I had different shades, and you can see the hots and the warms in all of those. And you can see that if we started off with reds, this is the only colour where I had a shade of violet that was very heavily blue, and you can see how bluer that is from all the rest of the tonings. You can see how brown this particular swatch is turning out, and it's turning out into a very deep blood crimson colour. Now with the browns, my tip with you for browns is if you're shading with red and you want to deepen that red. So I'm going to put a little bit here, and say I want to draw, just say I want to draw, bring that up, just pretend that's a little bit of a coxcomb, and we fill that in like a chicken kind of coxcomb, but you want to shade it and you want a little bit of definition. But how do you darken that unless you pick a deeper red? So let's just add in some brown earth, only small amounts, and we're going to make the deep shadows this side. And this is while the paint's still wet. So instead of using black, you can use brown, and then you can go back in with your red. My red's messy, and you can blend that back in. See how I'm just blending that back in so that you're not seeing the strokes so much, blending it in with the brown, and this is with a brush, so that in the end you've got some nice shadows there. So let me just zoom that right in, and you've got that nicely gentle shadowed look without it being too dark and giving you more realism. So the way to deepen your reds in an earthy way is to actually use browns, and they will do two different types. So I've got a gold oxide and a brown earth in the tests here. So this deepens it, this makes it more earthy and brown and lovely. I love it. I love the colour that is. It's more of a rust colour. And if I wanted to add an extra colour in again to lighten it, I could go in with that, or I could go in with a yellow while the paint is still wet and just blend it out. So let's just quickly go in with a yellow, just a little bit, right? So I've just got a tiny bit on my brush here, and we're going to lighten these sides up now. Now remember, yellow is always transparent in the colour wheel, always. So all you have to do is just blend away. And then again we have a depth of colour again. So you can see you're just starting to get depth, and you're starting to make your little coxcomb 3D. And this is how colour blending, when colours are wet and when you're using paint brushes, that's how it can work very well. So we've got flesh tones here. So the way that you would blend flesh tones is if you are drawing a face, and this is a skin tone base, so this was the top colour I used. Let's just pop some down the bottom. So say I draw an oval face, right? And I'm not doing anything else here other than just doing that face. I haven't drawn any features in, but I want to show you something. So if you then add the tiniest amount of red to the tip of your brush, and you blend while that's wet, you can start, then get the rest of the red off your brush down here like this, and in a circular motion you then start blending that, and suddenly you've got rosy cheeks. in a circular motion, or you just start. And if you imagine that the nose would go here and the eyes would go here, and they've got these really lovely rosy cheeks, right? So when you're using reds like that, not that I use reds, or I'll use a translucent red so that it will blend better. So that's the way you go with that. And of course all your flesh tones produce different results. This is a toning yellow grey. So that toning yellow grey, if I can just find that in what I was using when I slapped them all down. The toning grey yellowish, it has some blue in it, and you can tell that it's got blue in it with the shade. It's not warm here, it's cold. So if you want cold shadows on a face, you would be using this, or in a landscape, or if you're doing portraits or paintings that have different types of reds in them, you can blue your reds up and red your reds up and yellow your reds up. This was another flesh tone, but it's a very peachy flesh tone, and it says that it's flesh tint, just like that says that it's flesh tint, but one's pink and one's not. And so of course when you're already going from a peachy colour, you're going to just make it a peachy red, and it starts to look more like the Liquitex Basics primary red with a bit of white in it. So when you're adding white, we often think to ourselves, okay, so I've added white to that and it still looks red, it doesn't really look pink, and we're looking to make pink here. And one of the things I demonstrated by doing this was that a little bit of red goes an awfully long way, and if you want to make a pink out of your red, the smaller the better. The smaller the amount of red, the better. Have a look at the amount of white that I had to add, all of that white, to try and get it to, it's still a very strong pink. So if you're adding red into white to make a pink, start with however your quantity is the white that you have. So however you want to make up, never start with the red first, start with the white first. So if you're blending red and white together, always start with the white first, and then have your red on the side and just dab it a little bit in, mix it in, and see how you go from there. Don't just start with your red and add white to it. If you start with your red and add white to it, you will do the same mistake that I've made here, and you will always have way too much paint and you'll waste your paint. So that's my tip. So the two things that we're thinking about with our reds today are, browns are actually the shading colour for reds. So if you want to deepen your red and add beautiful shaded colours and then highlights, you will use reds and yellows, or reds and skin tones, or reds and oranges. But reds and oranges are very close together, so what you do when the paint is still wet is you add those two together. Now you can see here, so what I suggest that you do with these is that you have a test page for red. You draw up a grid and you have your controlled reds, and you pick a colour red that you really like, and then you just test it and you play around with it. So now for the end of the lesson, last week I used a brush, so I did my purples. I'll just quickly show you that page that I haven't used that. You can see the brush strokes in this. So this week I'm going to use a credit card. So we're going to use some reds and tone them together, bearing in mind what we wanted to see, and mixing, having a look at the colour chart that we've just used. Okay, so let's have a look and see what this done. So I've got some deep violet, I've got some crimson, Atelier crimson, I've got some flesh colour, and I've got a yellow flesh colour from Montmartre. So now I'm going to get my scrapey card, and again I'm going to scrape from the bottom. So we've got these beautiful crimsons coming in here, the violets, and now we're adding our reds in. And one of the things I love so much about credit cards is that they will quickly dry and they will leave marks. So this is another blending technique that I often use when I want to do something really quick and really fast. And there you have it. That's how I blend with a credit card. Again, I've dumped the pages. You can put paint on your credit card and then work your way through with that. I often then come back down the bottom, do different swirls, and I end up with nothing on my page. So if I go to the next page, I have nothing left on my scraper. And that's my start. Now I've started serious paintings with that. I had a beautiful trees painting that I did where all I did was I got some purple and some phthalo blue at the bottom, and all I did was scrape it to the top of the page, and that was my whole bottom layer for that whole painting. And my goodness, it looked really spectacular. Can you imagine if you started to paint a forest of trees over this and it's at sunset? And you've got the variations in the light coming through depending on where the shadows are. You can immediately start to imagine that at the bottom I've got this mess, and that's like the grass and the leaves at the bottom. And you can start putting in greys and Payne's greys and different colours on top of this when it's dry, and they blend in to have deeper shadows and all those things happening. And you've already created something that could be a journal page, and that journal page in total could take you like 10 minutes, and then you're sitting there going, wow, how did I do that? And I'm telling you now, that's one of the things that I love so much about credit card scraping, because it gives you so much life and definition, and different colors don't automatically all blend together all at once. Remember, if you're using an absorbent paint, then parts of that paint will blend in, and you see somewhere you can see the true paints here. That's where the paint is blended and soaked into the paper before I even got my credit card onto it. And I love that. I love that, the different characteristics of those paints. So this is the end of the second lesson, Red, for Technique Friday. Remember, learn something new today. It keeps you young.